and I figured out that Apple was investing, by 2015, $55 billion a year into China.
Apple wasn't always a $3 trillion giant. At one point, it was bleeding money and running out of time. That desperation led to bold decisions. Ones that took Apple far beyond California and into a partnership that would quietly reshape global power. Over the past decade, Apple has invested more into China than the US spent rebuilding Europe after World War II. Over $500 billion. And now, the company can't walk away even if it wants to. What began as a cost-cutting strategy has turned into a deep dependency with massive consequences. This isn't just a business story. It's about how the world's most valuable company helped fuel the rise of a rival superpower, one that now challenges the US in tech trade and influence. This video dives into a story few are willing to tell. So stay tuned, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It really helps. Apple is often seen as the symbol of American innovation, designed in California, loved around the world. But look closer, and you'll see something surprising. Nearly every iPhone, iPad, and MacBook is made far from American soil. In fact, over 90% of iPhones are assembled in China. That's not a coincidence. It's the result of years of deepening dependence. By 2015, Apple was pouring around $55 billion every year into its operations in China. That adds up to more than $500 billion over the past decade. More than 10 times what the US invested in the CHIPS Act to revive domestic manufacturing. Or President Trump's Golden Dome initiative. This level of spending isn't just business as usual. It's historic. Today, China is no longer just Apple's factory floor. It's also a massive market. In 2023, Apple earned over $72 billion in revenue from China alone, making it the company's second-largest market, right behind the US. For a brief moment that year, China even overtook the US in iPhone sales. That kind of growth didn't happen by accident. It came from years of Apple embedding itself deeply into China's economic system and making long-term bets that the country would remain a stable and profitable partner. But there's a catch. Apple didn't just move its manufacturing to China. It built an entire ecosystem around it. Factories, suppliers, engineers, logistics networks, all optimized to work inside the Chinese system. That makes the supply chain incredibly efficient and incredibly hard to unwind. Moving out would mean rebuilding everything from scratch, retraining workers, relocating equipment, and re-engineering processes. Not to mention, most of the specialized machines Apple uses are custom-made and now stuck behind China's export controls. This is the part of Apple's success story that rarely gets told. The part where global expansion created invisible chains, and where one of the world's most powerful companies became locked into a relationship it may no longer control. And to understand how that happened, we have to go back to the moment Apple nearly disappeared. In the mid-1990s, Apple was in serious trouble. The company had lost its edge in the computer market and was bleeding money. Fast. In 1996 alone, Apple reported a loss of $740 million, which would be over $1.4 billion today adjusted for inflation. Its products were expensive, sales were falling, and Microsoft's Windows-based PCs were dominating the market. At one point, Apple even hired a bankruptcy lawyer. Survival wasn't guaranteed. One reason Apple was falling behind was its stubborn refusal to embrace outsourcing. While competitors were moving production to third-party manufacturers overseas, Apple insisted on doing everything in-house. Its products were made at its own factory in Fremont, California, which meant higher costs and less flexibility. That strategy worked in the early days, but as the market shifted, it became a heavy burden. Apple began to experiment. In 1980, it opened a plant in Ireland. A year later, it launched operations in Singapore. It also started placing small orders with American contractors like SCI Systems. But these were baby steps. Even in the early 90s, Apple still leaned on domestic factories, like the one it built in Colorado in 1991. That changed after its near collapse. The company finally realized it couldn't compete without a global strategy, and like many US firms, it looked east. South Korea was already booming, so Apple partnered with LG for displays. In Taiwan, it signed contracts with Quanta and Inventec to build laptops. These early relationships paved the way for something much bigger: the eventual move to China. It was a slow transition, but one that would accelerate fast. Apple had started outsourcing out of desperation, but in the coming years, it would turn into something far more strategic, especially once a little-known company called Foxconn entered the picture. In the early 2000s, Apple was searching for a manufacturing partner that could move fast, handle huge volumes, and deliver the quality it demanded. That's when it found Foxconn, a Taiwanese company led by a sharp and relentless entrepreneur named Terry Gou. At the time, Foxconn was just one of many electronics manufacturers. But what Gou offered would change Apple's future, and China's. Foxconn didn't just offer cheap labor, it offered scale. In Shenzhen, Terry Gou built a vast industrial city, now known as Foxconn City, which could house and employ hundreds of thousands of workers. At its peak, this one complex alone had over 350,000 employees, working around the clock to assemble Apple devices. Entire supply chains were built around these factories. Within a few years, Foxconn became Apple's main manufacturing partner. The Chinese government played a key role in making this possible. Local officials offered Foxconn tax breaks, cheap land, access to water and electricity, and loans from state-run banks. The support was strategic. China saw Apple as a gateway to fast-track its industrial growth, and Terry Gou took full advantage. He set up over 30 factories across mainland China, creating a dense manufacturing network that no other company could match. When Apple launched the iPhone in 2007, Foxconn went all in. It rapidly expanded production, betting that the iPhone would become a global hit. The gamble paid off. Within a few years, the iPhone was generating over half of Apple's total revenue, and Foxconn had secured a near monopoly on iPhone assembly. But this partnership wasn't just good for business. It accelerated something far bigger. Foxconn's operations fueled China's rise as a global manufacturing power. And while the world was busy celebrating Apple's design and innovation, a silent transformation was happening behind factory walls. China wasn't just assembling gadgets. It was building capacity, gaining knowledge, and preparing for something far more ambitious. Inside Foxconn's factories, the human cost of Apple's global success became impossible to ignore. In 2010, a wave of worker suicides at the Shenzhen facility shocked the world. Young employees, many from rural provinces, were living in crowded dorms, working 12-hour shifts, 6 or 7 days a week. Some were paid as little as 50 cents an hour in the early years. When the tragedies mounted, Foxconn responded not by improving conditions, but by installing suicide prevention nets around the buildings. Reports of underage workers, grueling overtime, and forced internships continued to surface over the years. Investigations revealed that some students were made to work night shifts in order to graduate. In response, Apple promised audits, set up new labor standards, and released annual supplier responsibility reports. But real change has been slow. The entire business model rests on low labor costs, tight production timelines, and little room for error. A system that incentivizes cutting corners. What makes this more than just a labor issue is how the Chinese government fits into the picture. Local authorities not only turned a blind eye to violations, in many cases, they actively supported Foxconn's operations. For the CCP, these factories weren't just about jobs. They were part of a long-term strategy to pull in foreign companies, transfer knowledge, and build up China's own industrial base. By allowing exploitation to happen on a massive scale, Beijing ensured something else in return: control. Apple got efficiency, China got leverage, and that balance was about to tilt even further. In 2013, just one day after Xi Jinping officially took office, Chinese state media launched a coordinated attack on Apple. The message was clear: the company wasn't playing by the rules. The accusations centered around warranty policies in China, claims that turned out to be exaggerated or false. But Apple took the warning seriously. CEO Tim Cook issued a rare public apology, praised China's importance, and even rolled out customer service improvements that went beyond what was offered in the US. That wasn't just damage control. It marked the beginning of Apple's deeper alignment with China's strategic goals. Internally, the company formed a special team called the Gang of Eight, a group solely focused on managing relations with the Chinese government. Their conclusion was simple. The only way to survive in China was to actively support the CCP's priorities. And so Apple began transferring not just money, but knowledge. It invested billions into local training programs, supply chain development, and engineering education. Over the past 25 years, Apple has helped train an estimated 28 million people in China. From factory workers to high-level engineers. Many of these engineers went on to work at Chinese companies or teach at Chinese universities, spreading the skills they gained at Apple across the economy. This talent pipeline became one of the most valuable assets in China's industrial rise. It fit perfectly into Beijing's Made in China 2025 plan, a state-led push to dominate advanced manufacturing, robotics, semiconductors, and more. Apple's involvement gave that plan a major boost. The company's original goal was survival. What it ended up doing was helping China close the gap with the West, not just in smartphones, but across critical industries tied to power, production, and global influence. The factories that assemble iPhones aren't just good at making phones, they're good at making anything. That's the hidden power of advanced manufacturing. The same precision tools, robotics, and production systems used to build millions of Apple devices can also be used for military hardware. The shift from smartphones to drones or missile components isn't a giant leap. It's a matter of intent. This is what makes Apple's role in China's rise even more complex. Over the years, Apple trained tens of thousands of engineers in high-end production processes. These workers didn't stay confined to Foxconn or Apple's supply chain. Many moved into China's domestic tech and defense sectors, bringing their knowledge with them. As a result, China didn't just gain jobs. It gained talent capable of pushing its military and industrial capacity to new heights. That's what America's founding father Alexander Hamilton warned about over 2 centuries ago. He argued that a nation's independence and security were tied directly to its manufacturing base. Without it, a country becomes vulnerable, not only economically, but militarily. Today, China leads the world in drone exports and has rapidly scaled up production of hypersonic weapons, satellites, and AI-powered surveillance tools. Much of that capability was built on the foundation of mass manufacturing and technical know-how, the very same foundation Apple helped strengthen. While Apple never intended to support China's military ambitions, the tools it left behind have opened doors far beyond consumer electronics. As Apple deepened its ties with China, the company began making compromises that went far beyond supply chains. In 2017, Apple removed all major VPN apps from the Chinese App Store, cutting off one of the only ways Chinese users could access uncensored internet. That same year, the New York Times app was taken down as well, followed by Quran and Bible reading apps, and multiple podcast platforms. These weren't isolated decisions. They aligned with the Chinese government's broader effort to tighten control over digital information. Apple also agreed to store Chinese user data on local servers owned by a state-controlled company. While Apple claims it uses encryption and safeguards, the fact remains. All that data is now physically located inside China, under Chinese law. This includes messages, contacts, photos, and backups. One of Apple's core values has always been privacy, but in China, that promise doesn't hold up. The same iPhone that protects user data in the US can be easily monitored in China. In 2022, during anti-lockdown protests, Apple quietly limited AirDrop functionality, a feature often used to share protest material anonymously, just as unrest was spreading across Chinese cities. These changes weren't just about following local rules. They signaled Apple's willingness to help enforce the Chinese state's vision of the internet. Closed, controlled, and censored. For Apple, staying in China meant playing by Beijing's rules, even when those rules went against everything the company claimed to stand for. Apple is now trying to reduce its exposure to China. The company has ramped up production in India and Vietnam, hoping to shift some assembly out of Chinese territory. In 2023, India exported over $12 billion worth of iPhones, a major jump from just a few years earlier. Apple plans for 25% of all iPhones to be made in India by 2026. On paper, it looks like a smart exit strategy, but the reality is more complicated. Final assembly is just one part of Apple's vast supply chain. The real backbone, precision tools, custom machinery, trained engineers, and key components is still locked in China. Apple's manufacturing relies on thousands of specialized suppliers, most of which operate under Chinese control. Even worse, China has started blocking or delaying shipments of Apple's custom-built machines, making relocation much harder. Training new workers in India or Vietnam also takes time. Apple spent decades building up its Chinese workforce. Replicating that scale and skill in new countries won't happen overnight. And Beijing knows it. As Apple tries to diversify, China is quietly tightening its grip, using the very infrastructure Apple helped build to keep the company from walking away too easily. Apple has made big promises to bring jobs back to the US. In 2021, it pledged to invest $430 billion over 5 years. Then, in 2025, another headline grabbed attention. $500 billion committed to the American economy. The numbers sound impressive, but when you dig deeper, the impact feels a lot smaller. Each announcement included the same promise: 20,000 new jobs. No matter the size of the investment, the job count never changes. At that rate, it's roughly $25 million per job, a figure that raises more questions than confidence. Most of the money is likely going to data centers, corporate offices, or services, not real manufacturing. Factories are still overseas. The marketing is at home. Each time political pressure rises over China, Apple unveils another historic plan. But if past trends hold, these announcements serve more as headlines than hardware. Apple's biggest American product might just be press releases. Apple didn't just build devices in China, it helped build something far bigger. Now the company stands at a crossroads, caught between profit and power, control and compromise. The question isn't whether Apple wants to leave. The question is, can it? And what happens to the US economy if it can't? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if this raised questions you hadn't considered before, hit like, subscribe, and share, because this conversation is just getting started.